Matthew Bishop of The Economist, the author of The Road from Ruin, which tells us how we can get our country back from the collapse we've just had into being on top again, has some opinions about this debt issue. Is Paul Krugman right that this is not the time to be worried about the deficit?
Well, one of the things that we do in The Road from Ruin is to look at the aftermath of bubbles bursting throughout history and to say, well, what lessons can we learn from history? And it's a pretty strong lesson from the 1930s is that the government does need to reflate the economy when you get a liquidity crisis of the kind that we've had, when the public panics and retrenches and stops spending, that the government has to take up the slack. And so, I think it's right and it's good that the governments of the world have learned that one lesson from the 1930s. The trouble is, as we also observed, that in the 1970s, Keynesianism, as I guess that reflationary policy was known as, actually ran out of steam. That governments, actually aren't very good at spending money effectively, and that in the end, we had unsustainable, large states that were sucking all the entrepreneurial capital out of the system, and so we have to at some point reverse track. And the thing is, America already had a serious fiscal problem before we got into this crisis, because you've got unfunded Social Security and medical obligations that aren't even counted. Apparently Fannie and Freddie's bailout is not counted in some of the deficit numbers that we're seeing as well. There are real questions out in the global economy. I mean, obviously China has been buying a lot of American securities. There's growing worries that maybe that actually they'll say we'll lose confidence in American debt paper, and maybe even the ratings agencies would consider downgrading American debt, which would have sort of catastrophic implications in the capital markets. So I think there's a lot of reason to worry about that, and I think that's why the government is under pressure rightly to actually come up with a plan. I can't see it happening before the midterm elections because the pressure is going to be on the government to spend, and that's about it, and create jobs. And so as soon as we see the midterms out of the way, I think there's going to be a huge crisis about spending in America and how to actually bring this sort of rising debt problem under control.
So we spend through the midterms, then we have this debate. If the economists were running the country, what would we do?
Well, I think we would continue stimulating at the moment, but I think we would have some very tough proposals on privatising a lot of what's going on in the state, getting rid of a lot of entitlements, particularly around Social Security, probably raising the retirement age very aggressively for people who are approaching retirement now rather than people 20 years in the future, which tends to be what politicians are proposing. But you have to get very aggressive with a number of the promises that have been made, which are just not sustainable in the world we're now entering.
Raise taxes?
Well, I think we would actually look more at introducing VAT here and actually moving towards more of a flat tax, getting rid of some of the the idea that you can just simply tax the rich to solve this problem is ludicrous, and it's the thing that politicians often say because it's the easiest thing to say, but it's not going to address the problems that America's facing.
And anyone who travels in Europe, Americans who travel in Europe, very familiar with the VAT. What is the VAT, and what's the opposition to it if it's such a good idea?
Well, I mean, I think it's just a tax on the value. Each stage that value is added to the products that are being made. You take a bit of tax out of the system. It's very easy to collect because it's on goods and services that are bought. So there's a key point at which money is collected that you can actually tax. The problem with it is that it's regressive, that it hits poorer people harder than richer people. And so that makes it quite a hard sell politically.